Hey y'all, I'm really excited. I don't know if I shared this on the first time that he was on the podcast, but for all of y'all who send me messages and you say how much you love the podcast and how it feels like I'm your bestie in your car, in your pocket, on your walks, you owe this all to this person on the podcast today. It was this person who taught me, who took the time to say, this is the microphone you get, this is how you record it, use GarageBand, and just talk and graciously agreed to be the first interview on the podcast. And so I just want to give you your flowers of saying thank you so much for doing that because it has over 200 episodes later and so many doctors, so many people who get encouragement for this because you took the time to show me. So thank you so much, Dr. TJ Stewart, and
Of
welcome.
course. Oh my God. You have all the doctors, all of the words, all of the research. I still remember that conversation. In fact, we had it in O House
Mm-hmm.
in my apartment. In
Yep.
my apartments at UGA as a, what do they call us? Doctoral interns. That's still weird
Yes.
to me. That's the
Me
only part.
too.
Like we were graduate administrative assistants, but in Georgia they called us doctoral interns in housing. And yep, I remember that conversation because in fact, I don't even know if I bought a chair yet. I was still working at my kitchen
Yep.
table. Remember that
Yep.
apartment was
Uh-huh.
weird, and I was using one of those just wooden kitchen chairs, and I remember being so uncomfortable, but ended up buying one. But yes, where's the
Yes.
time gone?
I don't know.
We're nearing, I guess I was 20,
The
16, 17,
mhm.
18, somewhere in there. So
2017. Yep.
yeah, it
Mhm.
blows my mind. Like in a few years, it's not here yet, but in a few years, that will have been 10 years ago.
10, right?
In a few years.
Great. And I tell people like you just gotta start where you are.
Just start the thing.
I had
Just
no
start
idea
the
what I was
thing.
doing.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'll figure it out. And
Yeah.
I was too afraid to show up by myself. And so I interviewed people and asked TJ if he would be my first. And you can go back and listen to that episode, y'all, because it's still a great one. It's still one of the most
Yeah.
downloaded episodes.
Yeah, that was a good one. It was a good time.
Yeah.
It still comes up in my Facebook memories, and I'm always fondly.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
How are you these days? Where are you these days?
I'm good. I'm good. I am an assistant professor at Iowa State University, and that is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Iowa, Meskwaki, and Sauk Nation. So that's where I live, work, and play. My department is the Division of Higher Education, and specifically Student Affairs Program. So I work with the PhD program in higher education, the Student Affairs Master's Program, and I'm also a director of the Education for Social Justice Graduate Certificate, which is kind of cool and interesting. So that's what I do for work. Outside of that, I'm an avid Rihanna Navy fan. It's important to have identities outside of our work.
Absolutely.
And I am and I'm also a voracious reader of thriller novels,
Mm.
particularly YA, young adult thrillers. And so I've been enjoying doing a lot more reading this year than I have in recent memory. Let's see, Rihanna, reading. I also like to play video games. So, I try to be a
Yes.
whole human and also writing.
Yeah, for fun right now. I love it. Are you okay? So I don't know. I guess this is unexpected for me how heartbroken I am that I'm just like, even though I'm still holding on to hope and I'm like, let her live her life. She's just not gonna get another album. And I'm happy for sis. I hope once you have all the babies. I do. I
I,
just
I think we'll get one. We're gonna get
okay.
one. It's gonna take she's gonna take her time. And if memory serves, the tour
Mm-hmm.
we'll probably hear about her going on tour before we get the new music. The last
Mm-hmm.
time she announced the tour before the album had dropped. So I remember people complaining like, why do I want to buy
Mm-hmm.
tickets to a concert for music I haven't heard? But no, she's living her life, having the
Mm-hmm.
babies, and she's always wanted to be a mother. But music is her first love. I do think we will get new music. I think we just will have to be patient. And frankly, my pockets are glad that she hasn't announced yet.
Listen.
My sympathy went out to all of the Beehive, and I love Beyonce Down. I went to
Mm-hmm.
Formation World Tour. I also went to Mrs. Carter World Tour.
Mm.
I just knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't do Renaissance this time, so I'm happy for all the folks who did go, but had Robinisha, Rihanna Fenty announced the tour, I would have just been beside myself, like, please, not now. So
Yes, I mean, that's been me as I look at this Renaissance tour. But the other thing that has struck me, which I also think about this for Rihanna, which I don't think people think about it in this way. I regularly listen to their first albums like they came out yesterday. And I
uh-huh.
realize like for them, it probably makes absolutely no sense to do that music at all.
Yeah,
Like, because as long as they've been in this game. And part
yeah,
of me is like sad. And I've been looking at for the Renaissance tour. I've been looking at all the TikToks of I guess she's been teasing different songs from like B-Day
mhm,
and I Am Sasha Fierce, and people
yeah.
have been upset because she just goes into a Renaissance song. And I'm like, see, that would just make
Oh
me
yeah.
so sad.
Same.
Right?
Yeah,
Like,
and the further they go along, the less we hear of that music, unless it was like a huge, like
mm-hmm.
smash hit or chart topper or something. Like they might do one from that era, but some of the deep cuts be the ones I be wanting to hear, and they don't do those
Right.
album cuts as they get further along. So
Listen, there's some Rihanna
yeah,
songs that I'm like, people probably never heard these, but it's okay.
yeah, yeah.
And we don't have to
It's like
choose.
I want to hear breaking dishes at the
Da,
concert.
da, 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 da. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm back. Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
I want to
listen,
hear breaking dishes at a conference, at a excuse me, at a concert. Like, so
at
there's
a,
a lot of deep cuts. Thug in my life, you know.
yes.
It's like there's just so many like old school. And then
Oh,
as a Navy, I also it's curious to me that I at least I didn't, and she might have done it earlier too. I still haven't heard G4L live, and that's like the Navy anthem. I've never heard G4L live.
listen, I had a live by myself, had enough concerts in the car by myself. Even though I haven't either.
Yeah,
And no, we can talk about this, but I just am
yeah,
like, I'm a little sad because
yeah,
it's also a marker of we're also growing up
yeah, yeah.
and they don't
Life
know.
happens. Life is happening.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh-huh.
So you are someone who now helps guide other doctoral students through that
Yes.
process. How is that?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I think it is a challenge.
Mhm,
It is an opportunity. It's a challenging opportunity to help sort of, guide and marshal. And I think the biggest learning curve for me has been to recognize that all students aren't,
mm,
for better or for worse. So I don't always
mhm,
mean that in the positive.
mhm,
Like I don't mean that as
mhm,
I was an excellent doc student and all students are me. It also means that there were times that I was really, insecure about my work. And there are doc students that I deal with that, maybe that's not their experience either. So really what I have learned is that advising, similar to supervising. So for people who are newly into their role, many of us have worked jobs, right? And so what I would imagine many of us might say is that some of the best supervisors that we've had were people who supported us, who removed barriers out of our way, who allowed us to be our best at work. Because
mhm,
supervising is for the benefit of the supervisee, not the supervisor. So
mm,
as an advisor, my kind of paradigm is that advising is for the benefit of the advisee. That means sometimes I have to contort myself as a chair. I have to get out of my comfort zone as a chair. And once I kind of situated it from that framework, how I showed up as a supervisor is how I wanted to show up sort of as an advisor. It's just supervising or advising different types of work. So it's been really cool. And then frankly, I think more than any part of my academic process has been the thing that has made me ask the question, like, can I do this? Am I supposed to be
mm.
here? Like, so it wasn't a dissertation process.
Mhm,
It wasn't classes and coursework, it wasn't prelims. It was, you're now a professor. And now you're
mhm,
supposed to be directing other people's projects. And then, then you sort of, oh, okay, so this is where I have to deal with the imposter syndrome. Am I smart enough to be able to do
mhm,
this? And so I'm saying that to say, particularly for folks who have maybe junior faculty members as peers, we may be dealing with our own stuff too, right? In terms of
mm,
how to best support you. And so it's been good. It is uh difficult work, it is rewarding work, but it is exciting, because students are so creative and brilliant and think about things that you don't think about. They're reading things you've never read or thought to read, and asking questions. And so you just get to be privy to so many broad swaths of inquiry that you
mhm,
wouldn't otherwise, be privy to. And so yeah, and I was fortunate enough as a doc student, as you know, to have a chair that I thought was really thoughtful and supportive and wrong. And so oftentimes, you have a bad experience and you're like, I know what I don't want. So for
Mhm.
me, it was the reverse. It's like I know what I do want. I want to be able to recreate the students that I have, and so yeah, it's a little bit jarring in some
Yes.
ways, but it's been a good experience. I love to do the advising and the mentoring. We consider that generally as part of our teaching, right? When we
Mhm.
talk about what faculty do, teaching, research, and service, advising is essentially teaching, and mentoring is essentially
Mm.
teaching. And I've always been excited by that work. So it's good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's exciting. It's still a little weird, right? There's a small part of me in the back of my brain that still thinks of myself as like DJ, the doc student, or the emerging
Mhm.
scholar. Like I don't know if that's an identity you ever let go of.
Mm.
So it's sometimes it's a little weird, but it's good.
Listen, the people who know the name are sitting here like gagging. What emerging? They're probably like having a whole moment in their cars right now. Because if you haven't Googled the name, I'm gonna invite you to do so, and then you'll understand that reaction. But also shout out to Dr. Chris Linder. Her episode would have been like
Yes.
a couple of episodes before yours because we got into this conversation, which is what I'll ask you. I want to say I sincerely appreciate your candor, your transparency in talking about, yes, I too even have imposter syndrome and being like, this is a lot of responsibility. Are y'all sure? And the conversation I was also I've been having with all the folks who've come back is there's so many faculty
Yeah.
who don't feel like they can get transparent, especially when they're
Mm,
with their students. And that can come out a lot of different ways. I spent a lot of time in a group, really saying your advisor is a human and they also have imposter syndrome. Now, they may not feel like they can tell you that. It may just come out like you just need to keep reading more. You need to just work on those ideas because they don't have anything to offer you because
right.
you are ahead of them in this one particular area. And
Yeah.
to consider that and have some empathy for that.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, and I think it takes a really self-aware person to be able to sort of name that about themselves. But what I found, people in general, but especially students, and particularly, I saw this in my teaching, in my class teaching, right, not
Mhm.
my advising, that students appreciate a lot more honesty, authenticity, and transparency than one upholding an appearance of having it together if they don't. Now, the reality is that sometimes the majors or the professors, they have it together.
Mhm.
T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and students are like, all right, cool. Like, but sometimes they don't. And I think students appreciate that because it allows us to sort of usher forward a certain level of humanity. And so one of the things that I have learned, one of my strategies I would give to faculty, particularly any faculty that might be listening, is my philosophy was I may not understand intimately everything that any student I ever advise is going to do. My vow to them is to not get in their way. And so
Mhm.
it just means that how I support them looks different. That means sometimes I have to do a little bit of my own homework and research, not to catch up with them or to exceed them, but just to know enough to be able to say, oh, I understand what it is that you're doing. My other litmus test in those instances is what I would say to students. I'm also trying to give students like, right, trying to give
Mhm.
you like the cheat code. If you feel like you're getting resistance, and it might be because a faculty member doesn't understand, then part of the challenge is what you have to sort of filter that feedback through the lens of, well, I haven't done a good enough job at translating this to a lay audience. Say it differently is that whether it's your chair or any old person who wants to pick it up, they should be able to read it on some level. Now, we know
Mhm.
academic writing is a certain type of writing. There's a certain level of understanding and comprehension one must have, right? We're not going to ask a middle schooler to pick up a dissertation and understand what's happening.
Mhm.
But someone who is degreed should be able to read it and have a general sense and understanding of what the problem was,
Mhm.
what you set out to do, any background and context, what you found, and why it matters, right? On the most basic level, they're not going to be able to give a lecture after reading your
Mhm.
dissertation, but they could engage with you in some meaningful conversation. So, my approach to students when they're further ahead of me is like, this is great. You got this all up here in your head. It's not translating to the
Yeah.
page. So what I'm saying to you is not that it's not good, you haven't done enough. It's we're having a communication or translation issue in the writing. And so until it's clear enough that I can understand, we got to work on it. Not
Mhm.
this is a bad idea, not you shouldn't do this, not I need clarity. And so we also see this in the review process with
Yep.
like peer review work, right? And speaking of Chris, I had interviewed her on a podcast and we cited Amy Washington, who said, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Listen, I
And
love it.
so that's sort of the question I ask the students is, I believe you, I support you. I still don't get it. I want you to be effective in your communication of what it is that you're doing or that you did. And so that is a very comfortable place for me. I'm comfortable being in a place where a student has more requisite knowledge, and typically they should, because they
Yes.
are the expert on that thing. That's the whole point. You're generating new knowledge. Even if it's something, so I study, for example, erotic laborers. I study issues of fat phobia and sizeism. Those are areas of my expertise. So what that means is I'm going to be able to point you to readings, frameworks, theories, and concepts. But even within that, I'm not an expert on your topic
Mm.
within that world. So don't even get caught up with the, oh, well, this is my advisor's or my chair's area. So what? They know around what you're doing. They can point you in the direction. They know who you should be citing, who some things you should be thinking about. But when the rubber meets the road, this is your project. Nobody knows this project better than you. The primary task is one of communication.
Mm.
That's the task. Not to prove that it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile because you're doing it. Now we may tell you, we got to make a case, right?
Yeah.
We say that because when other people read it, not because I think that it's not worthy. It's I want someone else to pick it up and for you to be able to make your case,
Mm-hmm.
right? So typically, I think in a generative process, we're really just talking about getting communication and translation up to par. Because if you've
Mm-hmm.
gotten in a program, if you've gotten through candidacy and prelims, if you've gotten to a dissertation, it's not about you being smart enough or not. It's, is it communicated in a way that is clear that someone can understand what you did and why it was important?
Mm-hmm. I just spent a good hour yelling on the Instagram about this, about how, most of the time when people are giving you, particularly your chair is giving you your writing back, and they're saying you need to flesh this out or you need to expand on this point, they're not saying you need to go read more. They're not questioning if you know what you're talking about. They're
Absolutely.
questioning, are you clear? Are you explicit? Are you defining terms? Are you providing examples? Right? Like, are
Absolutely.
you organizing this? Or are you just expecting people to just find their way through this?
Right.
Right.
Yes. Don't fall back into that need to read more. That's not the question. You already have what you need. And I think for students, and you and I probably have dealt with this even in our own work,
Mm-hmm.
when it's up here in our head and it's in here in our heart, it's like we just kind of know it. It's like that is clear. No, it's clear for us because we're in it.
Yep.
And that's the reminder that I think oftentimes when you get feedback about say more, I don't understand this, help me figure out where, right? It's because the person that's reading it doesn't have all of the beautiful context and time that you have with this thing. I like to think of like, students' work is like they're in a relationship. I have a friend that had a party when she finished. It was like, and I pronounce you so and so in dissertation, right?
Mm-hmm.
She talked about how there were nights where they were fighting and the dissertation had to sleep in
Mm-hmm.
another room and where they didn't talk to each other for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying all this to say is like you have been in that relationship intimately. You know the ins and outs. You know the quirks of your
Yeah.
partner, this paper, this document. We don't. You got to tell us that. Give us that to help us understand so that when you say this thing, we have the context for that. And when you say
Mm-hmm.
that thing, we have the context, right? And so, yeah, it's not, unless it's you didn't cite this person who
Yeah.
talks about this, that's not an invitation to read more. It's an invitation to extrapolate what you already know and make it
Mm-hmm.
explicit. And sometimes that feels redundant. Like I already said this thing. Well,
Yeah.
part of academia is reasserting ideas
Welcome.
until they stick, right? It's saying the
um,
same thing over and over again. You're like, I talked about this in chapter 1, and you're gonna briefly mention it again in 2 and
mm-hmm.
3.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's helping the through line, right? Think of
Yep.
it as a tapestry. The whole tapestry is bound together by these threads. And some of those threads start at one end and some of those threads end at the other end, but they're all interwoven, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that is sort of what we're talking about. And so it's been a beautiful place for me to know that, but now to figure out how to teach students that. But it's easy for me to do it because I was in that place of feeling like,
Mm-hmm.
dang, I didn't already said this. Why aren't you a psychic, Chris Linder, my chair? Why don't you already know this, girl? And now I'm the chair, like, and students like,
What you talking
why don't
about?
you? Why don't you know this? And I'm like, because I don't. Like, you got to help me.
Yeah. And I I'm like, oh, I don't help nobody understand nothing else. It is that is a general rule. It's not that it's to be taken literal, but I mean, for some of y'all, it is to be taken literal. For every hour of writing, you need 3 hours of editing.
Yes.
And the reason why I talk so much about shitty paragraphs is like, because for some reason people think they look at you and they see all the, all the wonderful, amazing things that you have out and that's coming out. And they're like, he must sit down. And in 30 minutes, gold came out on a page and he turned it in and they said yes, not realizing the hours of editing and going back and forth and rearranging. People think you just sit down in one sitting and it's good to go.
No, like I mean, some pieces by the time they have come out have gone through upwards of 6 more rounds of revision. And
Mhm.
that's just with the primary reviewer. That's not just like your personal editing and re-editing, right? You might submit to a conference which goes through a review process. Then you get a discussant at the conference. So if it gets
Mhm.
accepted, you get a discussant at the conference which gives you feedback. You go to a journal and you hope for an R&R and they give you feedback. You have to incorporate that feedback. Sometimes they give you another one, you incorporate it. And if you're lucky, they might accept or they may say no. After 2 rounds, you started a new journal who wants to see something different. And so by the time it hits, you have revised that thing multiple times. Now, what I will say, having the shitty draft, and in fact, I even use that language from you, Marvette.
Mhm.
Even in my writing, I'm working with some doc students, and our timeline is literally like end of July, shitty draft, end of August, less shitty draft. Those are the
Mhm.
milestones.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
get words on the page because then it gives you something to edit from. It
Mhm.
gives something for your chair to respond to, right? And so we got to get it out. You got to get it out of yourself
Mhm.
so that we can look at it and do something with it. And that is so integral, I think, to the process. And what I would, and what I would go so far as to say is because it's very rare. I've not received one. I don't know anyone that has. That anyone receives an accept upon submission. Assume there's going to be feedback. So you sitting on a draft of anything, whether it's for your chair, whether it's
Mhm.
for a journal, it's a proposal, they're gonna have something to say. That's just what we do in academia.
That's why I
That
said that's
academia,
academics.
that should be our slogan.
Yes.
Academia, they always gonna have something to say.
Always got something to say.
It,
Even when it's finished and they're published, it's still still got
it's
something to
still
say.
somebody gonna be like, you could have did this, you could have cited that, you could have. So turn it in. I am a
Mhm.
proponent of turning in initial shitty drafts in
Mhm.
all levels, whether that is publication, whether that is your chair, whether that's to a conference. And I'm not saying something that is not worthy of you or beneath you. I'm not saying it's not something that you haven't thought about on any level, right? There's a difference. What I'm saying is retrain your brain to understand what is an acceptable first submission.
Mm.
And the reason why something like a shitty draft is useful language because we're beating up on ourselves because it's not perfect. So even what we're calling a shitty draft is simply just first draft.
Mhm.
But that we can't just say that. Oh, just turn in write a first draft paragraph because then all you're going to say is, "Oh, this is such a shitty first draft." That's the point.
Yeah.
That's why we call them drafts because the assumption is that they're going to change. And so I think that's really important. And my work, some of my most favorite things that I've published have gone through inordinate amounts of feedback and
Mhm.
revision. And I hated it while I was in it.
Mm.
But looking back, when I look at what I submitted versus what came out, I'm so grateful for having been pushed in those ways. But I couldn't get there if I didn't turn something in.
Mhm.
You got to get it out of your lab and you
Yeah.
got to get it into your chairs. That's all you got to do. And then we will send something back to you and you'll take a deep breath and you take one comment by comment and work it through, start to massage it out. And then as you start to sort of, practice that muscle, you find like you get to the point where you crave it. Now, I don't know about you, Marvette, but I'll get some feedback that says, "Oh, this looks great." And I'm looking at the
Mm-mm.
margins for the comments and I'm like,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
where's the feedback?
Mhm.
Where, like, I start to crave it. I feel like you ain't taking my work seriously now because you don't give it. And so that is why Chris used to say this, and I often say this too. It's feedback is a gift. Like someone took their time to engage your ideas and provide you ways that they thought they
Mhm.
could be strengthened and it could be
Mhm.
better. Like that is an act of love when done well,
Mm.
right? And we can't love you in that way if you don't give us something to read.
Yeah, because I tell people like, do you know how much energy and time it takes to read the writing that you didn't even want to read? Because
Or right.
That's one thing. You didn't even read this before you turned it in. And somebody sifted through all of that, gave you detailed feedback. You know how much time and attention it took.
Mhm.
That's why it's a gift. That's why it's an act of love. You're not just doing that for anyone,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And I think we talked about this in your first episode, but maybe not because
yeah,
timelines.
yeah.
But I'm thinking about that class, our diversity class. Was it a
Mhm.
diversity class? And Chris was like, rewrite this. I'm
Oh,
not
uh-huh.
grading it. Rewrite it. And just thinking about moments like that and just how she took so much time. She takes so much time and effort to say, this is who I am as to my philosophy around feedback. This is why you're gonna open your document and close it right back. Cause if it's your first time getting feedback from someone like me, it is different, but it's because I take such great time and attention. And I would agree. I mean, I guess I feel like I could speak for both of us of like that is why we're like, no, 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 give me feedback. Because to have
Yeah,
someone who approached our writing in that way, we can see how helpful that's been. Because people can look at you now like, oh, that's easy for you to say that, you love the feedback and you address the comments one by one because you doctor. You don't know what it's
mhm.
like. You don't remember what it's like
Oh,
to
yeah,
be on this side because people they don't understand how do they not take it personal, like it means something about them as a person when they have
yeah.
feedback.
Yeah, so it made me think about, and I was pulling up while you were talking. I wrote a book chapter in a book called Narratives of Grief and Hope in Higher Education. The title of that chapter is Hard Grief or Hard Love, Writing Through Doctoral Studies in the Loss of My Mother. So, for those who may not know, my mom passed away 2 weeks before I was to move to Georgia and start my program. So, I make a lot of different arguments in this piece, but I actually insert one of Chris's pieces of feedback writing my very first semester. And so I wrote in this chapter, I recall turning in my first major course assignment, a theoretical synthesis essay that I had no clue how to do. I did all that I could, turned it in, and hoped for the best. I received the following feedback from my professor, who also happened to be my dissertation chair. And she wrote, "Thanks for your work, TJ. While I know you understand the concepts associated with CRT and intersectionality theory, your grasp of the concept is not clear in this paper. Generally speaking, I struggle to follow a lot of the paper, especially as it relates to clarity. I made lots of other suggestions throughout, and we'll be discussing many of these in class because several people are making the same mistakes. They are common, new to academic writing type of errors. I'm also happy to have you revise this paper and earn back some of these points. I think these are important skills to develop, so let's keep working on it." I said the feedback was not what I was hoping for, and it was clear to me that I was not successfully articulating my feelings and my ideas in my writing. So
Mm.
no, man. I think about Drake started from the bottom. Now we here.
Yes.
Like it's part and parcel of the process. Like that was my first semester, like first paper in the class. And the reason why I smile when I mention CRT is because like I teach that class.
Yes.
I've done
It's a
multiple
whole
workshops for
module in
years.
FYD with him if y'all are curious. Go in the bonus section.
Yeah, but at the time, I'm literally getting a email from our professors like, it's not clear to me that you understand CRT from this paper,
Mhm.
right? And so I couldn't be the person that does the bonus module and finish your dissertation or teach, the CRT class without receiving and responding to that feedback in ways that are meaningful and helpful. And so it's a muscle. For people that like to work out, I need to get better at that, just moving my body. It's a muscle. You can't start by deadlifting 500 pounds. It just
Mhm.
doesn't work that way. Up to that. And part of that, and sometimes that means you cuss at the computer when ain't nobody there. Sometimes that means you write mean or snarky responses in the margins to them that you're going to delete before you send it back. I still do that,
Mhm.
by the way. A reviewer will make a comment and I'll write, like, "You got me effed up. We knucking and bucking and ready to fight" in the comments. And then I delete them, right? So you
Mhm.
go through whatever your ritual is to be able to respond to it. But over time, it's like, oh, okay. So now I'll get a feedback or even journals, they'll say major revision and I'm preparing for the worst. And I'm like, this ain't nothing. Like but that's because I've built up a muscle. I've
Mhm.
built up a tolerance and endurance to feedback in ways that are meaningful that allowed me to kind of figure out, okay, this is what I need to do to sift through my feelings and my emotions. Say, what is it that I did that they don't understand? Make clearer.
Yep.
And then it comes back, it's like, oh, this makes sense, right?
Mm.
Or my favorite, someone says, this isn't clear. Can you do this thing? And you just like highlight and delete it out of the paper. Sometimes that's the answer too. Nope, this
Mhm.
point ain't important enough for me to make. So I'm just
No.
gonna delete it, right? There's so many different ways you can approach that. But yeah, it used to be hard. I had to get it out the mud. So that's why I read that. Trust me. Trust me, that was you.
I can't let you go without asking this question
Okay.
because the amount of listen, I'm using the language of fighting, but it's not
Sure.
fighting. It's from love. But I go round for round with people who are like who absolutely are on the faculty track of things. And I will give feedback of like, I mean, that's cute. That's not you though. That does not
Mm,
represent you and what how you talk to me is not how you wrote that. And they're like,
yeah.
I just need to get a job though. You don't understand. This faculty market is hard. It's hard in these streets. And so I love how you frame this of exotic labor as that being the center focus of your dissertation and a lot of your work. How did you get a job? And how you knocking on
Yeah.
tenures door when you do work like this? How?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A couple different things come to mind. The first is ultimately you have to be able to situate why they are important within a particular sort of discourse or framework or paradigm that lets us understand that this is connected to something that we, whether it's an institution, an organization, or a person, claim to care about. Say that less convoluted. What I mean is people talk about DEI all the time. Now, it was hard when I was a doc student to figure out how do I communicate to people why this is important and why it matters.
Mhm.
What is it exactly that animates my research agenda, my writing? And it takes time. And I remember faculty encouraging us, how do you talk about it? And even when I became a faculty member, how do you talk about it? But when I was going on the market, how I describe my research. So it's easy for me to say, I study sex work and erotic labor, fat phobia, and sizeism, and how people of color are anti-Black. Those are all things that make people cringe for different reasons. Sex work is bad.
I love
Fat
it,
people
y'all. I love
fat
it.
people fat people shouldn't be fat. And why
Mhm.
are you trying to like punch down on people of color? They deal with
Mhm.
oppression too, right? So I'm
Mhm.
literally setting myself up to deal with particular type of hostilities and all of these sort of different areas. But what I say is I study, I write about people, populations, and ideas that are in the margins of the margins. And what
Mhm.
that means is when those of us who care about equity and justice, so that's important because I'm already laying out who I'm talking to. For those of us that care about equity and justice, when we think we've gotten our arms around all the issues, my work is asking the question, who is still missing and why? And so then what that tells me is that the things that I study are things that people have hyper marginalized experiences and or stigmatized experiences, hyper stigmatized experiences, which means that these are things that when people see or hear them, it is socially acceptable to say that thing is bad or wrong, whether it's a type of labor, erotic
Mhm.
labor, or a type of body, like a fat body. Then my question then is to people that care about equity and justice is what about these people too? Do they not deserve to be wrapped up in how we think about creating a world that liberates everyone? You say you care about racism and sexism and classism and, transphobia and we can go through the list. So if you care about those things, you have to also care about this. I'm not saying you have to agree with it, that you have to like it, but we have to invite it into conversation
Mhm.
because if we fix all of the isms as we know it, these isms still exist. And so then, and so it's a different way, right? It's a different message when it's these are the topics I study as opposed to here's the agenda I'm trying to pursue,
Mhm.
right? And so it took some time to sort of do that. And so I think that that is what allowed me to stand out is my commitment to things that frankly have made other people uncomfortable. It's my commitment to being who I am authentically as a scholar, as a writer, and as a researcher. And so you don't need to sanitize it. And I'm going to tell you why. Because anyone that would hire you because it was sanitized is not a place that you're going to be fulfilled. It's not a place that you're going to be as successful as you can be because you're starting, your prerequisite from even being in that place was being a diminished version of yourself.
Mhm.
That was literally how you entered. How do you expect to grow?
Mhm.
And the answer may be, I was perfectly prepared for this answer. In fact, I tell people all the time, I don't know if you remember this, Marvette, but I was literally on the phone with Spelman and Johnson at ACPA in Boston while you and Joan were in the room,
Mhm.
taking calls about admin jobs because I didn't know if faculty was going to happen for me. I was fully prepared for someone to say, for all those jobs to say, oh, this is not what we're interested in. But that
Mhm.
wasn't the experience. The experience was like, no, like, this is interesting. Now, they gonna have some questions.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I went during my search, I had people say, I had one person say, what do you say to people who says, well, I can understand how this might happen in like New York or Atlanta or LA, but why would we care as higher ed folks in Iowa? You got to be prepared to answer that question. I
Mhm.
remember another question to say, your research is so fascinating and so interesting. Where are you going to publish?
Mhm. Mhm.
My response was the same places that you publish.
Mm.
Here's why, right? And so it's not to say that people are going to be like, oh, we get it, we love it, we're celebrating you. It's like, I'm intrigued and I want to know how you can be successful. And so
Yeah.
you tell them, I'm going to be successful by being my authentic self, by doing work that matters. And it's funny because now at the time when I said I'm going to publish in the same place as you publish, I didn't know that. I was still interviewing, I was still dissertating, wrapping up my
Mhm.
dissertation. I had intended to finish, but now, just I want to think about my work on sex work. I mean, I have a book published with Routledge. I have an article, 2 articles in top tier journals, Journal of Diversity in Higher Ed, Journal of College Student Development. I have a methodological journal in action research. I have another one currently under review with and so it's like, and now and I was right. The
Yeah.
same places that person asked me publishes. It wasn't without its challenges and difficulty and winding roads. But, I think that like we talk about in the Black community about what does it mean to be like, when we say like, I'm 10 toes down,
Mhm.
like behind whether it's my kids, my partner, my man, my girl,
Mhm.
whatever. Be that for your work.
Mm.
Be that for your work. If you wouldn't invite your partner into a space and be ashamed of them and try to if you're in a white collar space and they do a blue collar job or whatever, right? You wouldn't do that to a human being because they would say you're fraud. You
Mhm.
say you love and you care about me, but when you get in certain spaces, you want to try to clean me up, right? Wouldn't you feel some sort of way if somebody did that to
Yeah.
you, a partner did that to
Yeah.
you, Marvette? Why you do that to your work?
Mhm.
So I get into spaces and I'm like, yeah, this is my boo, sex work, fat phobia, and sizeism.
Yep.
And this is what they do. This is what we do together. And I'm so proud, right? And I'm not just saying this to say it. Like, I remember when I was doing my dissertation work, I remember people were like, Tisha, why is your face on your flyer? You are so ridiculous and vain. My friends were joking. I'm like, because what I'm saying to the collaborators that I want to be in this study, these students, is I'm not ashamed of this work.
Mm-mm.
You're going to see me long before I see you because I'm not ashamed of this work. So, and
And
here's the
I
two
look like me with these identities because you can't always tell that from
that part.
of the
Because some people
flyer.
only would be in the
Mm.
study because it was me looking
Yeah.
like I do.
Mhm.
There were students who were like, if it had been somebody else, it would have been a no for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like to your point, like people appreciate that. People appreciate because then what I'm saying is that I have the self-assuredness and I have the confidence in my convictions and my work. That's what it means after all to be a scholar. It's not that we have it all figured out, not that we have all the right answers, but that we stand for something. And I felt like, and part of this, and I kind of mentioned this briefly, when my mom passed away, I didn't even know if I was going to finish the program or go to the program, let
Yeah.
alone have a life in academia. But what I said to myself, and part of it was me grieving, and part of it was me, baby, being jaded, is that if I'm going to do it, it's going to be something interesting and worthwhile, something that might make a difference. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to study leadership. And there's no shade to people studying leadership, but
Mm-mm.
like, I need it. And part of it, like I said, maybe it was my grief. I needed to feel something. I needed to feel like there were some stakes because I had lost someone so important to me that I felt like, man, I need to know that everything that I do moving forward matters. There's no more time
Mhm.
for superficial, ceremonial moments in my life. It has to matter meaningfully because
Yeah.
time is not long, right?
Mhm.
And so, and when the dust settled, I got this opportunity. So it's been amazing. It's
Mm.
truly been amazing. And as they say in our community, I wouldn't take nothing from my journey because it's
Mm-mm.
mine. So listen, like you can be the cussing professor and scholar. You can talk your shit. You can talk about topics that, seem scary to other people. That's all okay.
Mhm.
That is all acceptable. Like, we won't have an academy or a world that looks the way we think it looks and treats people the way we think it should treat them until we create it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's what you're doing. It's what you are doing. And
Yeah,
oh, this is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your
of course,
wisdom, your
anytime.
brilliance, your time with us. If folks want to follow up, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on the socials. I'm Tara J on all the socials, TerahJay. And yeah, meet me on the Twitters and the Gram and all of that stuff. You can also visit my website, which is in desperate need of an update, which is
Mhm.
terrajay.com. I'll be doing that soon,
Yes.
um, but definitely like keep marching along. There's room for
Yes.
you. There's room for you.
And all of that'll be in the show notes as well. Thank you so much. And of course, I've been saying this to everyone. We definitely need to have you back. You're a
Of course.
regular in FYD. And I told Joan and Ro and Chris, I was like, we should all get on the same call together.
Oh
But Ro
yeah.
was like, now you know, Lacey, we not gonna get no words in. Chris either. It's gonna be the Joan and TJ show. I was like, but
Hmm.
at least people will know. Like, they'll know how our dynamics are and, like, the conversation and what it looks like,
Oh yeah. It's magic. It's
mhm.
magic.
And so we were
You should
saying
definitely
probably
do
at
it.
ACPA in
Oh yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do a live. Do a
Mhm.
live and on location. Those were
Yes.
fun. I did one with for one of the ones I was on. But yeah, do a live
Mhm.
and on location at the 100th. That'll be
At
fun.
the 100, because I want y'all to show up and show out in Chicago. It's Chicago, y'all.
Yes.
Now it is March. I know, but listen, it's gonna
It's
be a good
okay.
time.
It's okay. It's gonna be a good time.
Mhm.
We're gonna get us Uncle Remus,
Mhm.
and it's gonna be great. So come
Yes.
out, good food, community.
Mm.
It'll be dope.
Thank you.